You're listening in on an animated discussion about Superman the Animated Series with two experts in their fields. I'm Joshua Unruh, superhero scholar.
And I'm Caleb Masters, your friendly neighborhood film critic extraordinaire from thecinematropolis.com. And today's topic is Two's a Crowd. Well, I gotta say, Joshua, we knew Parasite was coming back one of these days, but I certainly didn't anticipate it to go down like this in any capacity. So kudos to them for doing something different, question mark?
Yeah, I think you're onto it. It's a mixed bag, right? Like, I really enjoy where we end up with this episode. It's a really interesting, different facet of Parasite, or a way to approach him as a villain for Superman. But it also basically crumples up and throws away most of the potential that they left hanging from his introduction. So yeah, it's a little plus, a little minus, I think.
Well, it just seems to me like a weird sort of way of they've done Parasite and they're like, all right, well, there's not really much more to him, so we've got to add this other bad guy to like make Parasite more interesting, which I don't know if I necessarily agree with, but it's one way to complicate things for sure by getting two villains for the price of one.
It's a good approach. I don't think it's the only approach to Parasite, but it's a good approach. And most of my complaint is that we leave some stuff on the field when we use it. But as always, we are jumping ahead when we do have one design to talk about, one new character to really look at. I don't think we're ever going to see him again, but I really like this evil scientist, Garver, right? How do you feel about him?
I think he's great. He's definitely an ends justify the means kinds of guy. So always a fun philosophical opposite of Superman. And he's Machiavellian, but he's a scientist. Like, he's not a greedy capitalist per se. I don't know. He wants money, but
he wants money.
He seems to be more motivated intellectually than maybe most of Superman's other villains, and I found that to be a nice change of pace. And I do think, even though I think it's a weird combination, pairing him with Parasite was a choice. That was an interesting choice.
Yeah, I think that he really works as kind of a smaller stakes Lex Luthor, right? Like, he's hyper intelligent, he's cold and he's cruel, and he's willing to murder in the name of his ego. Like, that's Lex to a T. But Garver, as good as the casting and the design is for him, we weren't going to see him rise to a Lex level on his own. So pairing him with the sheer power of the Parasite really elevates him to a place where I don't need to see him even one more time, let alone dozens of times. But I feel like they nailed what they were going for with him in this episode. And what else can we ask, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. It's pretty basic. And it, really, Joshua, my biggest kind of vibe off this entire episode, or at least influence, really felt like it was straight out of Silence of the Lambs with Hannibal Lecter, where Parasite's Hannibal Lecter and Superman's, the detective. It's not 100% there, but that's the closest I could come up with, because I feel like this whole we're going to work with this other villain to stop this other villain kind of vibe, it really got me on that Silence of the Lambs track there.
Oh, you're really onto something, but there's some twists in there that make it really interesting. Like, it's more like what if Clarice teamed up with Buffalo Bill to find Hannibal Lecter, and instead Buffalo Bill and Hannibal Lecter teamed up, like, oh, you're right. There's a lot of parallels, but then they just put this really delicious twist on it. I'm still mad at them for basically throwing away all the best stuff that we were left with on Parasite, but my appreciation for this episode just grew another notch.
Yeah, absolutely. It's some clever choices. I don't know how effectively they implement any of them, but they are choices that I find fascinating. Yeah, and it certainly does not feel like an actual sequel to the last Parasite episode, as much as it feels like a side story that happens to include Parasite.
Right. And let me say, by way of transitioning into really getting serious about the episode, Parasite himself is still perfectly in character. I mean, perfectly, to the point where I'm going to make a terrible pun. They do such a good job of writing Parasite that he both literally and figuratively sucks.
Oh, there it is.
I had to get it in. It had to be done.
Listen, we had to use "it sucks." He sucks somewhere in our history of Parasite episodes. So this was an appropriate time to pull that card, Joshua. So I appreciate it. But yeah, I do like how Rudy, who is kind of a meathead, him and Garver,
yes,
the back and forth there. It's fun, right? He gets duped into helping Garver just long enough for him to realize, oh wait, this wasn't really a good idea.
Well, but that's pure Rudy too, right? We still see that in Rudy at the beginning. This guy is not like a complete idiot, but he's also not much of a forward thinker. Like, he doesn't think more than about 5 feet ahead. He has no grand designs beyond making himself more comfortable, which that's a character trait that is very much in keeping with the previous episode.
Yep.
And here that manifests itself by him offering to help, and all he wants in return is cable with premium channels, and he thinks he's a genius for thinking of this. Son, ask for some time off your sentence. What is wrong with you?
I think he's perfectly capable, because he's getting 3 square meals a day, like he's got his own space. I mean, the life we saw of Rudy in the first episode didn't indicate that he was exactly the happiest guy around. So I think
it's true. It's true. You're right.
I love how you say he has no grander plans. This guy has zero ambition, and honestly, that's kind of what makes him fascinating, because his comfort in the moment is really the only thing he cares about. And I think he was only slightly enticed by Garver's offer, because even he was initially resistant, but he was like, why not? That was like the only reason he helped was because he couldn't come up with a good enough reason not to, really.
Right. Are we going to get rich at the end of this? Okay, fine. Are we also maybe going to get Superman's powers too? Either or with the money, Yeah. Okay, good. I'll also say I really like the fact that they play it as though Rudy cannot stop Garver until the end of the episode. And even then, it's not like he steps in and says, this is my body. It's more like he causes enough conflict that they can put an end to the parasite threat. Garver overwhelming Rudy through sheer force of personality is a perfect character beat for both of them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's, again, just thinking about how weak-willed Rudy seems to be compared to Garver. I think that's the best case. And I like how Superman plays into that. Superman identifies that their interests are at odds, and he uses that to turn Rudy against Garver. And again, Garver doesn't really Rudy doesn't beat Garver, but it distracts him long enough for Superman to get the job done, essentially.
Right.
But that is funny. Superman appealing to Rudy's like, hey man, there's nothing in it for you. That's all it takes to get Rudy and Parasite to get on your side. Hey man, this is against your own interest. Oh, you know what? You're right.
You're right. And I'm about nothing but my own interest. All right, that's it. I'm tossing this guy over just as fast as I tossed my last alliance over. It's perfect, Rudy. It's perfect, Rudy. It's also perfect Garver, because whether Garver said so or not, we know Superman is right. Like, Garver's not sharing. Right. He is not going to share. It's not happening. It's not in him to do that. Yeah, great. Really great interaction between Garver and Rudy. Tells us a lot about both characters in a very short amount of time.
Yeah, most definitely. And I also like how, going back to the Lex Luthor light, how Garver's ego is really the thing that brings him down, just like Lex Luthor. It's a classic, classic Machiavellian intellectual, like, oh, I'm too brilliant to be undermined by this meathead, essentially. You know what I mean? Like, and yet, yes, that was your weakness. You were beaten by someone who you deemed as lesser than. So I thought that was a nice touch. Anytime you can pop those ego bubbles with the people who just think they're so great, I'm always behind that.
It's also a supervillain thing that I really like to see all the time, which is that supervillains don't team up well, right? Like, they can't, because they are by their own natures individually greedy, cruel, and backstabbing. So every villain team up already has the seeds of its own destruction sown into it, which I think is great character stuff for these big allegorical characters, right? Like, I want someone who's reading a superhero story to get the idea that if they become a very bad person, it's going to make it hard for them to connect with other people, even other very bad people. That's a life lesson, friends.
Yeah. Don't be a bad guy and work with other bad guys, okay? Because they're just going to screw you over. It's like Game of Thrones. So just be a good guy. Just be a good guy and work with good people and everything will be fine. That's the moral of the story here, really, Joshua.
Everything works out better, I guess, or at least you're happier in the doing of it. Yeah. That's the deal. All right, let's talk about the kind of bad stuff. And again, it's only bad because I think we felt about the introduction of Parasite was that it wasn't that great an episode, but it like on its own merits, but it was a really good introduction of the character and it left us on a really good game changer. I'm going to be a little like pedantic here and talk about the difference between a cliffhanger and a game changer, right? A cliffhanger is when we just leave with our heroes in the midst of some danger, whether they realize it or not. It's, classically it's the dun, 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 go to commercial, it's a cliffhanger. Cliffhangers are a tool that you are, as a writer, absolutely allowed to trot out every now and then, but it gets trotted out a little too much right now and people treat it like it's a much bigger deal than it is. Game changers, however, are fantastic. They are showing you that the situation you were in before that you have largely bested, hero, is completely different now. And in this case, with Parasite and Superman at the end of that episode, where Parasite was essentially in a coma and had Superman's biggest secret locked away in his head. But was he in a coma? Like Superman does not even realize the danger that he's in at the end of that episode.
Right.
And when we are reintroduced to Parasite in this episode, that danger has apparently evaporated. And I get that that's not what they wanted to do in this episode, but at the same time, that is a massive squandering of opportunity, in my opinion.
Well, no, I agree. And here's the thing. I actually don't remember if they go back to that well. You might have a better memory than me. And so I'm actually eager to find out if we actually bring that information back to the top at any point, because I can get on board with it if they go back to it later. Like, again, not a sequel, but a side story, right?
Sure.
But if they never pick up on it, it's like, well, you guys shouldn't have planted that seed if you weren't going to do anything with it. And that's not okay.
I vaguely recall them doing some more secret identity shenanigans with the Parasite, but I honestly don't remember anything specific. And considering that I actually have watched Superman the Animated Series several times in my life, it's telling that I can't immediately call up the example. So even if they bring it back, I think we may feel like it's not the most actualizing of that potential that they could have done.
Oh my goodness. Well, again, STAS writers, sometimes you guys are real great about planting seeds and then really brilliant at laying seeds that you go back to even like 10 years later. And This doesn't feel like one of those times.
Yeah, it doesn't. But I'm going to be honest, speaking about this episode specifically, it doesn't bother me. Like, it doesn't ruin this episode for me. It makes me sad that we didn't get that other more psychological episode. But at the same time, they're being so true to the character that honestly, I'm now realizing as I say this, that if I sat down to try and figure out what Rudy would do to capitalize on that information, I can't imagine anything that's actually very good.
Well, and
because he is not smart.
And that's the thing, Joshua. Like, maybe that's where they actually sat down and talked about this in the writer's room and they couldn't come up with anything. Because here's the thing. At the end of the day, I enjoy Rudy as a character. I like that he is so different than all the other villains in the sense that he has no ambition, just lives moment to moment, and has these amazing powers that he does basically nothing with, relatively speaking. So I love all that. But like, what would he do with that information that would be compelling? I mean, the only other way I could think of it is if he paired up with another bad guy and that other bad guy knew what to do with that, And so
absolutely.
I just don't think that if that's basically what they did here without the secret identity shenanigans. They're like, well, Parasite not strong enough on his own. We got to pair him with someone else. And here's what we got.
I think if I'm going to complain about this at all, because again, I really enjoyed this episode. So if I'm going to harsh them out at all for not picking up that thing that they left for themselves to pick up, my big complaint is that they didn't even hand wave it. We literally have a walk down the hall between Superman, Dr. Hamilton, and Captain Sawyer. We literally have a conversation walking where they could have said, does he seem to remember anything from the last time we fought? No, not much, Superman. Just at least hand wave it away in a line of dialogue, but they didn't even bother.
Didn't acknowledge.
And I'm not saying I'd be happy if they had done that, but I would be satisfied, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair point. One thing I wanted to note here, Joshua, to change the pace here, Superman power level check-in for the week. He did a couple of things. One of them, I don't even know how to describe it. So I'm going to start with the one I can describe. When he walks headfirst into the machine gun that's firing directly head on. And it's funny because the first one like knocks him down, but it's almost like he's like, oh, that's what that is. Now that I know what that feels like, I'll just overcome it. And he just walks straight right into the gun. So I thought that was kind of a neat little Superman power level check-in. But I also, and I don't know exactly how to describe it, but when he's in that room and the pillar falls on top of him, that once it drops on top of him and he catches it, it creates such a force that it makes the entire building crumble. Like his, I don't know the scientific term for it, but like basically his strength was stronger than the foundations of the building. So I thought that was kind of neat.
Well, following that like low rent or knockoff Lex Luthor vibe, this house is so tricked out like a supervillain lair in the suburbs that I love it. In fact, I meant to say at the top of the show, high five for this cold open. The cold open on this episode is stupendous. And the fact that it's a cold open that does actually lead directly into the main plot is pretty good stuff. I really like it. And the death traps in the house and Superman's difficulty with them, but thinking around some of them and powering through others. And Garver being so smug that he thinks that this high pressure plate has won him the day. And then Superman overcoming that, literally causing his house to fall down. Yeah. Spectacular. Yeah. Spectacular work.
Again, fragile ego. It's great. Like he was so confident only to be completely let down. Yeah. I think that's a good touch. And I also like, the whole, how Garver was like, you're going deep underground and it's totally surrounded by lead. So you can't find your way out. I just thought that was, some classic comic book shenanigans, but I enjoyed it quite a bit.
It is absolutely showing that Garver is thinking ahead of Superman, right? X-ray vision is a problem. Let's take that out of the equation. But, and I'm going to high five my little science-minded son who was watching this with me, Elijah, this is a brilliant catch. You did awesome. Was that when the nuclear weapon goes off, we don't actually have to worry about the radiation fallout as much because it is buried under tons of lead. Like, that could have been a serious problem for Metropolis that we just hand waved and didn't talk about. But whether they meant it to or not, Garver thinking ahead on X-ray vision actually puts him in a place where his nuclear explosion is nowhere near as damaging to Metropolis as it could have been, which might be more of that ego getting in the way. I don't know. Like, there's so many ways to read that, but it was I want to high five my kid. He was the one who was like, oh, they don't need to worry so much about the radiation. It's covered in lead. Good job, kiddo.
Right. Oh, man. He's so smart. So last thing I want to note here, Joshua, too, is this is a little bit of a follow-up on an earlier episode of an animated discussion, but propaganda. Don't want to get too into the weeds here, but just, it's one of those things, once you see it, you can't unsee it. And the fact that they determined at the beginning of the episode, well, doing it the Emil Hamilton way, trying to negotiate, it's not going to get done. So let's call in a heavily armored tank to bust this house down. I was like, yep, this is go cops. Yeah.
We've definitely covered that in depth on the Tools of the Trade episode, and it will come up again. And I'm going to drop a little hint of a project that I'm working on right now. It's months from being done, but if you guys are interested in this kind of thing, follow me on Twitter, keep an eye out for it. I am right now teaming up with some other critics. The only one I can name right now is the fantastic Sarah Sentry, who you have heard on this podcast before when I was talking about the new Harley Quinn animated series on DC Universe. She joined me for that. And she and I are working very hard on putting together a collection of essays from different comic book and superhero critics and writers that addresses how to get the propaganda out of our superhero books going forward. So I don't even have a name for the project yet, but know that it's being worked on. And if that sounds interesting, you may have to wait 4 or 5 or 6 months because it's an undertaking, but keep an eye on my Twitter. I will be going on about it as soon as there are more details to go on about.
All right, Joshua, I can't wait to check it out. I think this is a hot topic right now. And you got to think police and a lot of comic books are really like a foundational element
to the genre. Yeah, definitely.
Like you think about
foundational.
Yeah, there we go. It's foundational to the genre. It's a foundational element. Like Commissioner Gordon is a cop, right? Like
right. Yeah.
I mean, in the series, Dan Turpin's a good guy, and he's a cop, and he's a hothead, but the show says that's okay. So
right.
It's everywhere.
That's the trick. That's the trick. It's not the presence of the police. It's the rubber stamping of them. And that just, I mean, as we talked about in Tools of the Trade, is just not a thing that creators can do or ought to do if they want to be responsible creators in the year of our Lord 2020. So, all right. Heavy stuff aside, my own shameless plug for other projects aside, Caleb, tell me, if people enjoy this episode or they enjoy the interplay between Rudy and Garver, what alternative media recommendation would you have for them?
I mean, I already said it, Silence of the Lambs. It came to mind, and I didn't have too many others that I was just top of mind. But if I'm saying Silence of the Lambs, of course, I'm just going to throw out there, and I guess technically it is propaganda because it stars police. But if you like Silence of the Lambs, I have to highly, highly, highly recommend the television show Hannibal, which is currently streaming on Netflix, by the way. It is some weird, crazy freaking TV that still, when I think about it to this day, I'm like, it ran on NBC, which it makes zero sense. Because it's like weirder.
Right.
It's weirder than most HBO shows and even more violent than a lot of HBO shows, but somehow it ran on network TV for 3 seasons. It's incredible. It's great. It's fun. Yes, the police are the main characters, but so keep that in mind. But it's a great show. So yeah, Silence of the Lambs and the television show Hannibal, now streaming on Netflix. Joshua, how about you?
Okay, this is a little bit conceptual, but I think you'll see me. I'm going to go with Die Hard with a Vengeance. And I'm going to go with Die Hard with a Vengeance because if you watch that movie, you believe that it could have been a Batman and Robin versus the Riddler story that got repurposed for Die Hard. And in fact, I think it was some other kind of story that got like a script for a different kind of story that got repurposed for Die Hard. But I have always felt like the puzzles and the tricks and the double blinds and the kind of odd couple having to get together to solve it all looks just like any given issue of Marvel Team Up or The Brave and the Bold, to give you the DC option. It's so good as a film, and the puzzles are so good, and it just has a real supervillain feel to it. And it's all about bombs going off, right? And trying to outsmart your dumber cop-like opponent. It just felt very on point for Two's a Crowd. That about wraps it up for this animated discussion. If you enjoyed this conversation and would like to join in, come find us on Twitter. Caleb is at CMastersTalk, and I'm at Joshua Unruh, and the hashtag is Animated Discussion. Caleb, where else can people find you?
Well, Joshua, I'm the editor-in-chief and contributor at the Cinematropolis, a website that specializes in in-depth film critique and analysis. We publish in-depth essays on all types of films. You can find those articles, as well as our podcast, The Cinematic Schematic, at thecinematropolis.com. We can also find that wherever your podcasts are found.
Remember that an animated discussion is a Pulp Diction Productions program and is 100% supported by listeners like you. To find out how you can keep this and our other shows in production, check out patreon.com/Pulp Diction Productions. Show your support by pledging at Patreon or by leaving a great review on Apple Podcasts to make it easier for more people to find us and join in the discussion.
And the links to the Patreon, Apple Podcasts, our recommendations, and Twitter are easy to find in the show notes. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us for this animated discussion. We'll be back next time to talk about the Demon Within from the new Batman Adventures.
Until next time, look! Up in the sky! It's a bird! It's a plane! It's an animated discussion!